Hello and welcome to this Monday's edition of This Week in Civics with the Bill of Rights Institute. My name is Rachel Davison Humphreys, and I'm your host every Monday morning as we talk about civics, history, what's happening at the Bill of Rights Institute. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. We want to hear from you on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. We are live streaming everywhere, and we're so excited to be here every week to help you, the history and civics educator and enthusiast, understand what's happening. So we know that citizenship is hard work. BRI is here to help. And this show happens to help you plan your week, think about your week, think about all the events, and learn what resources are out there to help you think through them. So the immigration and refugee crisis is continuing. And so we wanted to talk today about refugees, immigration, and what unites Americans, kind of what our Unum is, that idea of oneness, coming together. So e pluribus unum, one of our national mottos, this idea that out of many, we are one. We're one country, we're one nation, we're one human family. And in thinking about all of this in response to the continuing crisis of Afghanistan, we wanted to touch on our resources and stories that we have on refugees, immigration, and unity. So firstly, if you don't know about BRI's current events work, our content team does an amazing job of every week making sure that there are classroom-ready news, events, and articles on our website. So for instance, the U.S. expands refugee aid program for Afghans following rise in Taliban violence. We picked that resource because it's really ready, really well written and ready for classroom use. And you can find those on our current events site. All of the links I'm going to talk to in this episode are linked below, so please go and find them. The other thing is that every other week we have e-lessons, which I highly recommend you go sign up for. And we had this great e-lesson on refugees and American history. And what I loved about this lesson is that it compares and contrasts the Irish and the Cuban refugee crises. So you have the Irish refugee crisis in the 1840s and 50s, and then the Cuban refugee crisis in the 1950s and 60s. And then I can easily imagine taking that to today and saying, what is the Afghani refugee crisis of the 2020s? And as you're looking at those resources, you've heard this idea of the upstanders, or look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers called them. One of our favorite American portraits is about a man named Varian Fry. It's called Varian Fry's Grave Responsibility. And it looks at what our responsibility is in a crisis. So Varian Fry helped refugees escape Nazism. And so it looks at his story and kind of the motivations behind his actions. So if you're interested not only in refugees, but also in immigration more broadly, we have some fantastic resources. On the small scale, we have 2 great e-lessons, which are linked below. But then we have a full 3-unit resource called Immigration and Citizenship, which looks at really the history of immigration law and kind of the push-pull tension within immigration and kind of emigration from different countries. And so if you look again in the link, it's a fantastic essay. I learned a lot teaching about the history of immigration. I didn't know all the ins and outs of the legal structures. And my favorite thing about this essay, or this lesson, is the final unit where the students look at different proposed solutions throughout history to the immigration crisis and really understand them so that they can develop their own and kind of think through all of the very complex issues that come with immigration policy in the US. One of my favorite kind of immigration advocates was a woman named Jane Addams. She was the founder of Hull House in Chicago. She was a social pioneer at the turn of the century. If you're not familiar with Jane Addams, highly recommend you go look her up. So I'm going to leave us today thinking about what unites us with a quote from Jane Addams. So again, she was a big mover and shaker in something called the settlement movement, or social settlements. And this idea was that we should all all live together in a very communal way in order to support democracy. And so she designed one of these that became a model across the world called Hull House. It's a fantastic museum. If you're ever in Chicagoland, I highly recommend going and visiting Jane Addams' Hull House. It's one of my favorite museums. It's a very kind of tactile, active museum. And her story is just so powerful and so such a model of conviction. So if you're not familiar with Jane Addams and you haven't visited Hull House, highly recommended. So this quote is from The Subjective Necessity of Social Settlements. She wrote it in 1892, then it was republished in the 1910s. But she's talking about young people and the importance of young people in our democratic project. So it is inevitable that those who feel most keenly the insincerity around not being able to do anything and partial living should be our young people, our so-called educated young people who accomplish little toward the solution of social problems and who bear the brunt of being cultivated into unnourished and oversensitive lives. They've been shut off from the common labor by which they live and which is a great source of moral and physical health. They feel a fatal want of harmony between their theory and their lives, and a lack of coordination between thought and action. It's hard for us to realize how seriously many of them are taking to the notion of human brotherhood, how eagerly they long to give tangible expression to the democratic ideal. These young men and women long to socialize their democracy, are animated by certain hopes. These hopes may be loosely formulated thus, that if in a democratic country nothing can be permanently achieved save through the masses of people, it will be impossible to achieve a higher political life than the people themselves crave, that it is difficult to see how the notion of a higher civic life can be fostered save through common intercourse, through discussion, conversation. That's my introduction. That the blessing which we associate with the life of refinement and cultivation can be made universal and must be made universal if they're to be permanent. The good we secure ourselves is precarious and uncertain. It's floating in midair until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life. And on that note, I leave you this week with the ideas that we are always striving for that higher political life to be made universal, and we to concretize and come together in common discourse. And so in the words of Jane Addams and Varian Fry, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Please sign up for our opportunities. I'm here every Monday. I'd love to hear how you're using our resources. Like, comment, subscribe. Citizenship is hard work. We're here to help. Let us know how we can help better. And I'll see you next week.